that's that's normal. First of all, I would like to thank Afonso Seixas to have accepted our invitation to come and talk to us. I'm sure, we are all anxious to listen to him and see, such a difficult topic to see different points of view from someone who is at the same time a Jesuit and graduate, who has a graduation in law, so he's a lawyer by the Portuguese University, Catholic University. Afonso was born in Porto, and he was in Portugal for a long time. And he had a master in international law and human rights by the London School of Economics and Political Science, and completed his doctoral thesis in international humanitarian law at the School of Law at the University of Essex. Presently, Afonso is with the University of St. Louis in the United States. Welcome, Afonso. It's a pleasure to have you with us. We are anxious to listen to your talk, and I hope that in the end there will be lots of questions that will make this a very pleasant hour that we have in front of us. Afonso, the floor is yours, please.
So thank you very much, and this is very kind invitation to talk for engineers. I'm very nervous about that because as a lawyer and an international lawyer, we always have a bit of we are always a bit afraid of technicians. However, I have to explain that my research is specifically in the applications of AI in military affairs and specifically in autonomous weapon systems. And well, before I came to the US, in my last 2 or 3 years in the UK, I was working in Oxford, and I dealt specifically with British defense systems. And now that I moved to the US, I've been participating with the Dutch and Israeli government regarding the systems that the Dutch and the Israelis are deploying, and slightly introducing myself in the American system. What I want to say with this is that although we have this big name of artificial intelligence, as the different governments and armed forces of different states use AI, is in itself a universe. So what I decided for my presentation, which is slightly big, but I will move fast the slides, is to present what are the current problems for an international humanitarian lawyer. That means international lawyer that deals with the problems of warfare. What are the problems that we do not know how to solve because we don't know the conundrum of artificial intelligence. So I prepared something to tell you how the state of art is at this moment, and then I will move to a field that is slightly unknown for me that I'm exploring at the moment. And actually, I desire to listen to your feedback and actually questions, because I have a lot to learn about this new paradigm of artificial intelligence that the Americans are deploying and developing for offensive and defensive systems. So without further ado, I will proceed with my presentation. And okay, here we go. Now, I hope you can see the presentation, right? The PowerPoint, yeah? Okay.
Yeah.
So I don't know why right. So I don't want to bother you so much with the questions of the laws of war. I just want to introduce the fact that the war until the 20th century was not regulated at all. So what we call in the history of the laws of war, it was total warfare. So the states had the right to do war as they pleased, and and obligations on the battlefield were very reduced. So at the moment, we have this set of documents. Of course, we have much more in terms of regulation of weapons, but I just want to show you what stands today as the main body of international humanitarian law. So we have the Geneva Conventions from 49, of course, is a result of the end of the Second World War. So it's some of their dispositions are very much focused in the calamities and especially human suffering of the Second World War. And then more recently in 1977, because of the situation of the Cold War and especially regarding Portugal with the problems of the war in the colonies, was not just Portugal, but Portugal was the last one. So we have lots of international documents that were specifically directed to the Portuguese government of the time. And these two protocols to the to the Geneva Conventions, one of them, which we call AP1, Additional Protocol 1, regulates international armed conflicts. This means that is a conflict between states. And then we have the Additional Protocol 2 that refers to non-international armed conflicts, for instance, like the so-called war on terrorism. So we have states fighting non-state actors. So one of the sides to the conflict is not a state. So, when these protocols were written, the first one has more than 100 articles. The second one has just 22 articles. So the problem of non-international armed conflicts was completely irrelevant at the time because people would think that it's up to the state to regulate what happens in its territory. As you can imagine, with the problem of non-state actors and especially with terrorism organizations, the NIACs, so the non-international armed conflicts, have increased immensely the importance. At the same time, is the type of conflict that is less regulated. Now, from these legal conquests, to put states signing treaties, as you can imagine, is very difficult, especially treaties that seek to limit the powers of the states to go into warfare. We have the principle of distinction and the principle and the rule of proportionality, which is very much the focus of my presentation and where I would like to call your attention for these, as we call it, cardinal principles of humanitarian law. So the principle of distinction basically is a very simple principle to talk about, in the sense that it's an obligation of any army, of any armed forces, to distinguish civilians from combatants and civilian objects from military objects. So this is considered an imperative norm of international law. But you said, easy. But now let's think about, so I need to distinguish civilians from combatants. So what about a terrorist that is disguised as a civilian? How do we know that that specific person is actually a terrorist and not a civilian? For instance, also a school and hospitals that are protected buildings, but suddenly the armed forces hide or use our warehouses for military equipment. So the principle of distinction becomes a source of lots of complex questions. And AI came to help us to have much more data, to help us to distinguish actually where weapons can be, where we can see with huge quality the images of people that participate in the hostilities, disguised as civilians, but actually engaging directly in the hostilities. So, principle of distinction. Then another conquest of the laws of war was the principle of proportionality. And here is where my presentation is focused. So, according to the rule of proportionality as it is written in Article 57.2, don't worry, is that when a commander, a military commander, realizes that in order to target a military target, he needs to compromise the civilians. That is, he knows that there will be collateral damage. That is, killing of civilians, and damage or destruction of civilian objects. And when this happens, the military commander needs to apply the rule of proportionality, meaning that the military advantage of that attack cannot be considered excessive regarding the collateral damage. So we have this assessment that is based in quantitative data, the number of civilians, the number of people that we want to target, the number of military facilities that we need to destroy, etc. On the other side, the number of civilians or civilian objects that will be affected. And the military commander needs to provide with this balance, and he cannot allow an attack. Actually, he needs to suspend or cancel an attack when he considers that the collateral damage will be excessive. Now, when we move to artificial intelligence, the problem starts being a quite striking one. Will artificial intelligence move to the level of being able to have this level of subjectivity? For instance, in the last conference that I gave, one of the panelists was Manuela Vloz, I presume very well known among engineers. And she said, yes, we can look to generative AI, and they are already going into levels of abstraction that was not possible a couple of years ago. But what are we saying? So can we say that at a certain point the AI will be able to determine what can be considered excessive regarding the number of casualties, the number of destruction, and also regarding reverberating effects of an attack? And that is the big problem. So artificial intelligence, as you know much better than I do, is not new, but autonomous weapon systems are a very new type of technology. And we have, of course, these algorithms. I specifically work with neural networks. So within the AI algorithms, I just look to the problems that neural networks raise. So we have the genetic algorithms and other kind of algorithms, but in the terms of military affairs, I just deal with neural networks. And of course, these algorithms have the capability to process data in a variety of volume and velocity that a human operator cannot do in due time. That is, in a situation of an attack, of course, these computers and these algorithms work in a speed that is impossible for any human operator to have that data processed in the same time that he needs to know in order to proceed to an attack. The problem with these systems is the problem that we have since 2014. Is the problem, the ethical problem, and also a legal problem. Because in looking to the directives and statements regarding autonomous weapon systems, and here I'm talking about the 15 countries that have already published and publicized statements regarding the future of autonomous weapon systems. If we look to all those statements, we have a conclusion becomes clear. The human operator, whether will become redundant, being there or not is the same thing, or the military commander or any human operator will not have time to intervene with the system if the human operator verifies any situation of error or malfunction of the system. And of course, these, for lawyers, as you can imagine, put us very nervous. Because if we have an autonomous weapon system that causes violations of the laws of war, that if it would committed by a human would be a war crime, and then the person would be found liable or responsible. If we have an autonomous weapon systems, the problems start emerging when we look to international criminal law. And so these raise a huge debate in the international community. And in 2014, the Convention for Conventional Weapons, so the CCW, start gathering 80 states to decide the future of autonomous weapon systems. Just to inform you that until today, the convention was not even able to pronounce a definition of autonomous weapon systems. We have the United States that refuses to give a definition. We're going to look to the possible definition of the United States. We have the UK that goes to levels of artificial intelligence that nobody thinks it will be possible. And then we have in the middle states like Netherlands, Israel, and so on with other kind of definitions. But I chose to present the two more famous definitions, one provided by the United States in 2023, and the definition by the British government of 2012. So if we look to the United States definition, we have a weapon system that once activated can select and engage targets without further intervention by an operator. And this definition is the definition that is used by many scholars and also by many governments. But when we look to this definition, and I think for an engineer or roboticist, it's even easier than for a lawyer, this definition actually doesn't say anything. Because if we look to the present stage of any weapon that is activated, and the target is pre-given to the system once activated selects the target and engages. So we look to the Iron Dome by the Israeli government. We look to the Aegis system by the US, but also used by Portugal. For instance, when the Aegis system is specifically designed to target military aircraft from the enemy. So once a military aircraft shows in the screen of these computers, the Aegis system immediately selects the target and engages the target without human supervision. AI lead us to much more complex scenarios. So the United States gave a definition that actually doesn't help anyone because it doesn't show what we can do at the moment. Then if we go to the British, and the British, as you know, I lived 12 years in the UK and I have a huge respect from British scholars and from the British culture. But I learned in my 12 years in the UK, with all due respect, and please don't take me wrong, but the way the British do international politics, they are a bunch of bastards that behave as gentlemen. So, and we're going to look to the definition given to by the British government, and you're going to see how they play with words. So an autonomous system is capable of understanding higher level intent and direction. And from this understanding, its perception of its environment, such a system is able to take appropriate action to bring about the desired state. It is capable of deciding a course of action. Now, the previous definition was so much criticized that the UK changed to this one because the first definition was exactly the same, except the beginning would be an autonomous system is capable of understanding high intent and direction parallel to humans. So if we see for the British government, an autonomous system, the threshold is so high that the systems that they are using do not fall under this category. So basically, the UK has a system that they say always, the Prime Minister, the Foreign Secretary, and so on, they always say, we won't allow autonomous weapon systems. Of course, if this is the definition of autonomous weapon systems, that they need to have this high level of intent, whatever, we can go and discuss what means intentionality in robotics and so on. But if we're going to the point to say that these systems are able to take decisions, we are moving away from the systems that can optimize results and outcomes, which is a completely different thing. Because if autonomous weapon systems could take decisions or make decisions, they would be liable and responsible for their own decisions. The problem is that these systems optimize outcomes based on the data they receive, and they do not make decisions because they are not moral agents. They don't know what is good data or bad data, although in part of how they are trained with supervised and unsupervised data that you know better than I do. So I offered a possible definition. So a weapon system designed and programmed for a mission. This is very important for the military defense. So the system is designed and programmed for a specific mission to be adaptive to its environment. So the system needs to be able to adapt its previous mission to new circumstances of the battlefield, and then to identify, so the system will be able to determine who or what is a target, and then select and engage without human intervention. Why? And so in the previous conference with I had engineers from Israel, they looked at me and they said, "Why do you introduce in your definition designed?" Well, because the US well, I cannot share the conflict with you, but one of the conflicts in which the US is involved at the moment, um, um, sorry, this sounds a bit rude, but I was working with the legal advisor for the Pentagon in matters of autonomous systems, and so this conversation came along. But of course, we cannot share this information publicly, so I can't tell you the conflict. That is the reason I'm being more secretive. But in this specific conflict, the US doesn't take weapons to the battlefield. They take these 3D printers, and the micro drones are produced on the battlefield, and they are designed according to the circumstances of the battlefield. So it's not we are coming to a point that we no longer need the physical weapon because we can produce them on the battlefield. And these are the traditional problems that I call them very boring. And you have my book. I was very lucky that was published by Cambridge. And the problems, the problems that everybody is discussing that I think it's okay, it's the problem of meaningful human control. So for instance, the states that are against these systems, we have 31 states at the moment that want to ban any kind of autonomous weapon system. They call the problem of meaningful human control. All the weapons should be under meaningful human control regarding the critical functions, that is, identify, select, and engage in a target. Then we have the problem of philosophers of ethicists, especially from the Dutch military forces, which is this problem of delegation for an autonomous weapon systems of decisions involving lethal force. Basically, is it legitimate from the ethical point of view to delegate to a system the power to kill or to destroy? And then we have the problem of accountability. That is, if we have semantic errors in terms of software or also syntax errors, who is going to be liable since we don't have a human operator in the loop? And these were the problems that I address in my doctoral thesis in this book that I think, are already boring because lots of people have discussed. I have to say that people, when they find me that I'm a priest, they get immediately, they think that, they expect some kind of speech, but I will address, and if you could help me with this question, the ethical decision. So people get very concerned because these systems will be able to target without human supervision, and we are delegating decisions to kill, to use lethal force into machines. But now the scenario is this. We have two scenarios. The first situation, we have the traditional bombing. So we have an aircraft full of bombs, and the human operator pulls the trigger, the bombs are released, and they destroy. Now, my problem is the fact that it's a human that pulls the trigger and the bombs fall indiscriminately on the battlefield. Is it better than the system that promises to be much more efficient in terms of specific targets? It's just a question that the human operator pulls the trigger. Then we have the problem of drone pilots. So the drone pilots, they just receive, the drone pilot doesn't know anything about the target. He receives data. In an average basis, a decision to target someone or destroy a military facility involves at least 80 people in the chain of command. So the drone pilot, when he receives the order, please destroy X or kill X, then the drone pilot doesn't know anything about the qualification of the target. He just receives an order. And he's miles away from the battlefield. So these weapons create a system that the soldier becomes invulnerable to physical damage. And it just targets and destroys or kills whoever he needs to kill. But my problem is, will the fact that the human operator is behind the screen, does this guarantee more ethical approach to the laws of war? Here is where I raise my question. Why? Because when a drone pilot receives an order to target, whether it's an object or whether it's a person, the fact is that that person is an object, is a military target. Bin Laden is a military target. And according to the laws of war, he can be targeted, he can be killed. So my question is, what exactly is the sphere of, or the spectrum for a moral decision by a drone pilot regarding an autonomous weapon system? And then I will leave it like that, and we can explore these. Now, I want to move to what exactly is the point of my conversation when I need your help. Now, what exactly is a military commander in the AI age? So until today, the military commander needs to certify all the information he receives in order to give an order of attack. It's what we call the rules of precaution. The military commander needs to be very cautious with the principle of distinction. He needs to certify that the targets are military targets. And then he needs also to be responsible for the rule of proportionality, that is, to consider that the attack won't be excessive regarding the collateral damage. Now, we have the new system that I'm at the moment studying, this system with the help of the Department of Defense, which is the F-35. The F-35, as you can imagine, weighs a few tons. But is the first system that has a new system of AI called HALES. So, and this is very American, a model designed for American systems. So this apparently just a simple aircraft is a multi-domain sensing system. So he applies deep sensing and high accuracy detection and exploitation system. So this simple aircraft is able, according to the software that this aircraft has, is able to cross information from multiple domains of warfare on the land, in the air, on the sea. It can detect where the target is with more accuracy than traditional image. So there is a big dependency on satellites and so on that raise us also questions of outer space that we can develop. And so he gives information to the commander in the ground that we believe to be much more accurate than previously. Now, the problem for the military commander is this, and here is where I need your help, is this system, specifically the F-35, depends exclusively the type of algorithms in neural networks. So even if the military commander has any question, how can he know how the data was processed? How can the military commander question basically a possible outcome suggested by these systems. Now, the problem becomes more acute when we move to the British technology. So I think the most important and well-known part of my research is my finger. So here you see my finger amplified 100 times with what we call a bee drone. So this was developed by Professor Brooks from the University of Reading in the UK. And I'm going to be very short explaining this system. So this system is specifically designed for train stations to attack suicide vectors. So people that are identified out of the train station by the CCTV cameras. As you know, in the UK, only in the city of London, we have more than 1 million CCTV cameras with the capacity to read the iris of each person. So the iris of our eyes is like a fingerprint, so it's irreplaceable. It's like our DNA. So, well, I could develop this, how they get this data and so on. So once a possible terrorist, a person that is fully armed, is detected in the streets of London and the person is directing himself to a train station, once he gets into the train station, this bee drone is activated by facial recognition. So you have the camera above the injection. You have a microprocessor and the wings and then the 6 sensors, and then you have the injection. So the injection applies 3 types of poison. The third one is lethal, but the last thing you want is to kill a terrorist. So the poisons are created to make the person feel numb. In one case, simulates a heart attack. In the other one, people start having crumbles in the inferior limbs. And it's called bee drone because it stings in your carotid behind your ear. And once the drone stings the person, it fragments itself. So in order not to be recognized that the person was victim of an attack. So that is the reason why it's called bee drone, because like the bee, when it stings, dies. So this bee drone, it fragments itself and or self-destroys. And so it depend on women or men. The activation of the poison is between 4 and 10 seconds, and then the person falls, and a bunch of paramedics come into the train station, and the person is sent to a very specific kind of hospital. But the question here is that we have, for the first time, being applied by the British Armed Forces, a system that does not have any intervention of a human operator. So the system is activated by facial recognition on the streets. The data passes by computer and by internet to a device like this one, and the bee drone activates. Another thing that is amazing about this bee drone is that it weighs 9 grams, so less than a wedding ring, as we can normally explain, and is the first device for the British forces, and I'm talking about the British forces. This was the first system that was designed in a bottom-up AI. So Professor Brooks, he has a very interesting book, but basically he was with this drama that Pedro Domingos also has. How can we put all the information in the world in a computer? And suddenly he is watching mosquitoes, and he says, well, why on earth a mosquito does not go against obstacles? Why the mosquito doesn't go against windows and dies? So basically, he built with his team, of course, and then he received quite a huge amount of money. He create these labs full of trees and obstacles, and these systems are designed to learn from actual bees and mosquitoes how to fly. So this is why we call it bottom up. So this system learn how to fly by imitation and learning from nature, which is another also problem that we have with AI. And so my question is, what is the role of the military commander here? Do we need military commanders in the future warfare? So now the problems emerge if we look to what states are saying. So in 2023, it's previous, but they updated it in 2023. The United States consider that autonomous and semi-autonomous systems will be designed to allow commanders and operators to exercise appropriate levels of human judgment. So here it seems that the systems are designed to help military commanders take decisions. But it's not what we are verifying in practice. Actually, if we look to the current conflict in Israel and look into the models that are being used by the Israeli forces, Lavender, the first one, the Gospel, the second one, Hey Daddy, the third one, are support decisions mechanisms to the military commander that basically they offer an outcome to the military commander, and the military commander simply confirms what the system is telling it. So this developed a big problem for lawyers, which is the automation bias. So in all the tests that we pursue with military commanders, 92% of the military commanders do not question what the system is giving to them. First, because the military commander says, I don't have all the data that the system has. Second, the military commanders are afraid of questioning a system that knows more than the military commander. And third, if something goes wrong, the decision will be a technical decision and not a human decision. And in the last survey that was done in the military, American military forces, 82 or 83% of the military commanders are extremely conservative, well, call it conservative, and they are rejecting to deploy autonomous weapon systems on the battlefield. So the United States at this moment faces a huge problem, which is a huge investment in artificial intelligence of millions and millions, and having the human operators, especially the military commanders, rejecting to deploy or activate these systems. And then we have also in the directive of the Department of Defense that these systems need to be tested and evaluated to develop a level of confidence or trust that the system will operate normally. Now, my problem, and this is my question more to the engineers, there is a bunch of rules about this, is how we going to test these kind of systems? And my question is this one. So when we look and study the neural networks, and you know this much better than I do, there is a level of unpredictability of outcomes. Secondly, the system will be an open system, so he will receive data from the battlefield that was not supervised. So how can we know what we don't know? So my problem is, how can we develop this level of trust in military commanders when actually, when this system is being tested at the level of a lab, it's never possible to test it with the real circumstances of the battlefield. Third point is, how can we test the system not knowing what the enemy knows? For instance, these systems are highly vulnerable to cyber attacks. So the states at the moment, and I think this is the concern of the United States is not yet deploying autonomous weapon systems. And if it does it in secret, because the problem of these systems, at the end of the day, being turned against the state that is deploying them. And this is a risk that the states cannot endure. So, my last slide. So who is the military commander in the artificial intelligence era? So we have the automation bias, that is in the assessment that the military commander makes before an attack, it basically will confirm what the system says. And in this case, artificial intelligence is making the military commander absolutely redundant. We have the decision support mechanisms that the ones here, you have the ones that are being used by Israel. We have the HALES being used by the US. But you look to the names, Hello Daddy, Lavender, the gospel, for a priest to hear the gospel as a decision support system for attacks is quite challenging. But this system, the way they, as you know from the news and so on, the military commander, in the time frame that he has to provide to decide on an attack, he doesn't have the time, and he won't have even the means to question a system that is a multi-domain sensing system. And then the last one, maybe extremely legal. So when we look to the jurisprudence of the international courts to find a military commander responsible, the threshold of guilt is that a military commander needs to use common sense and be reasonable, well-informed. So we do not demand a military commander to be perfect. We just demand that the military commander cannot know everything. He just decides with the information that is available at the moment and based on his common sense and reasonable, well-informed, and if he is reasonable, well-informed. So now I want to ask you these questions to see if you can help me, because these are the problems that I'm facing now when I'm writing about this. A common sense is an expression used by lots of roboticists. So Bostrom, for instance, in his book, Superintelligence, says that common sense is impossible to teach. So, and we all know what is common sense, but in terms of military language, I replaced the word common sense, or the two words common sense, by experience. That is, a commander doesn't arrive to the post of a general just because he's aging. A person becomes a general, a major general, and so on because of their experience and by the quality of his decisions on the battlefield. So my problem here is, although the states are designing these systems, is how can we introduce in one of these systems the value of experience, the value of military strategy, for instance. And then the reasonable, well-informed that the jurisprudence requires from a military commander. It's possible to say, well, the military commander is better informed than he was before because these systems process data that would be impossible for a military commander. He crosses information. He discovers patterns of behavior. So neural networks are very good for that. But can we say that the military commander is actually informed? Because when we say, I don't know if you agree, but when you say, for instance, oh, Afonso is well informed about autonomous weapon systems, it means that I have data and then I reflect on the data. That is what is a well-informed person. So according to the information I have, I make a judgment. With the new decision support mechanisms used by Israel, with the HAIL system developed by the United States, what is a reasonable, well-informed is a requirement that is vanishing because the military commander actually is not informed, is confronted with a possible outcome. And sometimes, as you know, a neural network can offer several possible decisions, but the military commander to decide them is in base of intuition because it doesn't have the possibility to confront the data, for example. And then there is this last question that when I deal with ethicists, and even with the arguments presented by the Holy See, I find a very troubling ethical argument that we are always comparing humans with machines. For instance, one of the arguments presented by the NGOs fighting against these systems is that these systems need to prove to be better than human beings. Well, these systems won't be ever human beings. So why comparing to completely different realities, for example? And that is very troubling for me because I think the fascinating point of AI is that at the end we are discussing what it means to be human. But to compare these systems with human operators when they operate in completely different ways, I think it is not reasonable. And so I think that the way we understand the military commander needs to be completely redesigned and rewritten, which I don't know why. So when Professor Getz-Oliver invited me for this conference, I said, well, I found my solution. I will ask the experts of technology, how should a military commander be a commander in the era of artificial intelligence? And now I exhausted all my knowledge. I can't hear you.
Estás mudo, Pedro.
I was saying thank you so much, Afonso. It was incredibly interesting and challenging. The number of questions that you raised. I don't know, for me at least, most of those topics are very new. I'm not able to reason about them very easily, but there are among our colleagues lots of people that are much better informed than me. So I asked them to start the questions or answers as was asked.
Hello. So I think I can start. Well, thank you, Afonso, so much for this this very, very engaging talk. So these are very difficult issues. I don't think that researchers, engineers, technicians have the answers that you require. I don't believe that these questions have to be addressed by people from the technological side. I would say quite the opposite, because researchers and technicians, engineers will find a solution, a technical solution for some of these problems. I don't believe that there are limits. I don't know any philosophical or physical limits for the capabilities of AI. But these questions are very, very difficult, and I think that they have to be addressed by the society as a whole, and by people like you more than people like us, I would say. But I would like to talk of another dimension of the dangers of autonomous weapons, which is on one hand the ramp up. So when one state or one part has AI and autonomous weapons, AI for defense or for attacking more than defense. Well, defense should be okay, but for attacking, and different parts in conflicts and different powers in the world will have this kind of weapons. This will ramp up to a situation where wars will be played by autonomous systems, which will be a completely different scenario. And if the commander, as you were saying, so if the commanding of operations passes to these systems, this means that they will have the ability, the agency to decide on their own targets, and possibly, even if we are more ambitious with what these systems can do, they will define their own objectives and strategies, and this will start to feel like a sci-fi scenario where the AI has the capability and the agency of fighting the humans instead of fighting each other. So I think I feel that very naively, I feel that this is maybe the largest or the biggest challenge, the biggest issue of having this ramp up that will lead to a completely different scenario of this one that you were describing, where we have to think of consequences and the responsibilities and war laws, etc., which are like what we have now, but it could very quickly transform into something that is completely out of our hands. So that would be my kind of comment question for you. And thank you.
So how should we do? Should I answer immediately, or you want to gather 2 or 3 questions and then I answer? But for me, whatever you decide is great. It's just to know.
There are no hands raised, so please,
Okay.
Afonso.
So I'll answer.
Sorry, can I join a question then?
Yeah, sure.
Thank you. Thank you, Afonso, for your presentation. Raises enormous and various questions. If possible, I'd like to hear your thoughts on how does the commander's reliance on AI system affect the requirement or the concept of what is feasible as regards the fundamental duty, general principle to take precautions so that the attacks are lawful. And just some example, just to guide the problems that arise from me with this issue is, for example, does a targeting a system that uses AI, it will focus on personnel, gathering their images, knowing their track records and all that. But if the situation on the terrain changes, for example, if these B drones or B killer bots are deployed some kilometers away and then the situation changes there, does, for example, this system have to be integrated with another systems or another platform that gathers intel? Basically, what changes regarding feasibility? Is it a delegation? Can it be possible? I think about these questions. I'd just like to hear your thoughts, if possible. Thank you.
All right. Okay, so thank you very much for the comments and questions. So, and I think the 2 questions are related, but so it's funny because we are assisting. So I remember when I started my PhD, it was a casualty actually. I was coming out of church, and a professor of robotics of the university gave me a lift to the main campus. And so he said, "Oh, I heard that you are in the law department." He said, "I am." And said, "What are you doing as your research?" So I said, "Autonomous weapon systems." And this professor of robotics said, "You lawyers are impossible because you only say no to the things we try to do and solve the problems." And I asked these professors, "Well, are you ready to be responsible for everything that you create in your lab?" And he said, "Of course not. So that is why you need a lawyer." So the lawyers don't do anything. The lawyers are at the end of a chain. We justify behaviors. We say if this is legitimate or not legitimate. It's for the ethicists to say if this should be allowed or not allowed. And it's up to the roboticists to create solutions to the problems of the world. So the lawyers do not create obstacles to the technicians. But it's funny that is and is being detected everywhere that the engineers on the field of autonomous weapon systems are saying this is not up to us. This is not our responsibility. We create solutions to the problems, and then it's up to the user to be responsible. I have questions about this. If ethics goes to the plan of designing and programming in spite of the user. But looking to the user and how international criminal law is being developed, is that the engineers and technicians will be found responsible as they were not before. And that was why I was raising this question. So as you can imagine, a military commander is an expert in military strategy, in laws of war, in lots of things, but not in computer science. Military commanders is even at the top of the armies in the world, which we go to the US, to the UK, to Russia, and so on. The military commanders are people that know very little, actually, about the technology of warfare that they are using. They know how the system operates. They know the capabilities of the system. They know some safeguards of the system. And then they know how to activate the system and deactivate the system according to the circumstances of the battlefield. Now, what is happening with the British Army is that they are integrating in the military forces computer scientists, roboticists, and so on in in the chain of command. So these people in the lower chain of command will actually give advice to the military commander, and those will be engineers and computer scientists that will inform the commander if the system is up to the challenge that the military commander has. And this is something that, for instance, is escaping to the knowledge of engineers of private corporations that work for the US Armed Forces, for example, Lockheed Martin, and so on, that they do not know that the law is developing in a way that civilian private corporations, technicians will and can be found accountable for the way they design the system. So I think to say that this is up to the lawyers to solve or to ethicists and not so much for the engineers because the engineers have the practical solution, I understand the reasoning, but I think the law is not developing in that sense. And in that sense. Now, regarding to the second question, the reliance of AI systems, the feasible precautions, and the change of circumstances on the battlefield. So I wrote extensively about these, but one of the points in my definition is, and actually the CCW, so the Convention for Conventional Weapons, has introduced in the possible new definition the question of adaptability. So the system, because it's an open system, is a system that is open to new data that was not supervised or trained, but comes from the battlefield. For instance, imagine I'm about to target a house, because I know that some terrorists are hiding in that house, and suddenly a school bus just parks around the house. So, when the military commander was designing the attack, there were no civilians, so the decision was easy. So how this system so the system need to be capable to adapt to the new circumstances of the battlefield. And here is where precisely my question jumps in. In the sense is, what is the role of the military commander when these systems perceive reality in a way that is impossible for a human operator to actually confront if the system is wrong, right? So, for instance, we have that that case of oh God, I'm forgetting the name, Petrov. No, the Petrov case. The Petrov case is the case of the 70s. So, no, sorry, 80s. So a Russian officer is on duty, and the computer detects that the Americans are launching a nuclear attack against Russia. And so this officer, Petrov, had to activate the nuclear defense mechanisms of Russia. However, this Petrov, based on intuition and common sense, said something is wrong with the system. And he deactivated the system. Now, what happened? Actually, it was a problem of the radar. The radar and the sensors had a misinterpretation of the reality. So he was, thank God, right not to deactivate the system. But what happened? He was punished by the Russian authorities because he disobeyed to what the machine had told him, and he didn't confront his decision with a higher person in command. But the reason of his judgment is that he disobeyed a system that was trained to protect Russia. And this will put the military commanders in a situation. Of course, then he escaped to the US and now he's an American citizen, another typical story. But this puts the military commanders in the position that even if they doubt the system, they say, well, this was designed by the engineers to work in these circumstances. So it will be their fault. I will obey to the system because I have no possibilities to confront the system. And here is where the rules of precaution, and the reason for my intervention is there any role for the military commander in the age of AI? I have another question there, Pedro, I believe.
Yes. Hi. Well, first of all, thanks a lot for your talk. It was very interesting. So I have two questions. One is first a comment. I don't know if you're familiar with the concept of explainable AI.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'd like to know what's your take on it. Do you think it's helpful to answer your questions or to help to mitigate the problem of not knowing how neural networks work? And the second is a question regarding the definitions of autonomous systems that you were talking about. So you talked about the definition by the US and the UK and some other countries, Israel, and I don't remember all of them, but I was wondering whether is there any working group at the UN working on this, or some international organization not closely attached to a state, and especially also it's not specifically like a global organization, but what about the European Union? Don't they have, isn't there any definition coming out from the European Union? Because it's usually an organization which is very worried about defining ethical frameworks and regulating technology. It's usually at the forefront. And I'd like to know whether there is something coming out from that organization.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. So I think I addressed these questions. Actually, in my PowerPoint, I put the SHAI, which is XAI, so the paradigm of explainable AI. Of course, in the room, there are people who know much more about explainable AI than I do. I think it's the new paradigm of machine learning. So the groups, even here at the university, in the Department of Robotics, the big department of machine learning is with researchers trying to develop what the explainable AI can be. At the moment, we say that neural networks operate as black boxes. So in this sense, it's impossible to know how the system has processed the data and the interconnections that the system has done with the data that was given to the system, or the data that the system collected. So when something happens and we want to trace back why that was the outcome, when we get into black boxes algorithms, that is impossible to know. So, and actually, I think here is where the School of Oxford, the Blavatnik School of Government has developed, and the AI Institute have developed, especially to criticize the GDPR, so the regulation of private data in Europe, that I developed another system while I was in Oxford, so we sent this to the European Union, is that we need to at least be able to ask questions to the algorithm, like, for instance, what was the data that you privileged? Or, for instance, the algorithm explain if the data would be different, we would come to a different decision. So is the factual and counterfactual algorithms. And so until that level of explainable AI is reached, I think actually that autonomous weapon system should not be deployed by states. This is my personal approach to the matter. Now, regarding the European Union, as you know, the European Union published very recently a huge act, the European AI Act, which with more than 500 pages, that tries to look to the different aspects of AI. I think the approach of the European Union is correct and wrong at the same time, in my humble opinion, because in somehow it tries to look to the dangers of the AI and trying to regulate and to define the problems. And this is a huge achievement by the European Union. However, in matters of AI for defense or offensive systems, although they raise different questions, as the first person who asked questions, I'm sorry, I think it was Alipio George. So the first person to ask it, defensive and offensive systems raise different questions, of course, but I think they are very, very limited. And the fact, for instance, that they do not allow research in certain areas, that is to put states in a completely in an impossible situation, because the states won't stop developing AI in matters of defense or of attack. So I think that the European Act needs maybe to open slightly to the world of today. And I think regarding autonomous weapons systems, I haven't read yet the European Act on that specific matter, but the European Union a couple of years ago in 2021 and 22, for instance, issued a statement saying that autonomous weapons systems should be banned in the context of the European Union. At the same time, if you go to the European Parliament, they passed on the very same month that statement was approved, a huge grant, I think at the moment was $5 billion to support research in autonomous weapons systems. So as you can imagine, this is very difficult to coordinate. So they say that these systems are banned, and then they support with $5 billion research in autonomous weapon systems. So, and without explaining what exactly is the context of the research. Now, passing for the last part, I think I mentioned in my presentation. So at the level of the United Nations, we have the CCW, so the Convention for the Conventional Weapons, that depends on the UNIDIR, so the United Nations Association for Disarmament, that since 2014 are debating the problems of autonomous weapon systems. They are changing. They offered a decision last year by July of 2024. A possible definition was presented, rejected by many states. It was beautiful to see, that parts of my work were recognized, and this is recognizing the adaptability of the systems and so on. But the states don't want to define what an autonomous weapon system is, and the states are, of course, very secretive regarding the military equipment that they develop. And I think this is all. But I see other hands.
Thank you.
I saw Susanna. No. And then there is.
It was just maybe more a quick comment, but I don't resist to say that in the last webinar related to this topic, there was a very image that stuck to me, which was when someone pulls the trigger, the hand should shake. And I think that's a very important thing, maybe not to be so accurate, but about being human, and the ethics is probably more important than being, effective. And maybe we shouldn't forget about that the hand should shake.
Great. I loved it. So, no, thank you. That is a very, I like to be provocative, and that was one of my provocations. I totally agree, and I need to add that in the studies that were made to drone pilots, I don't know if you are aware how the drone pilots emerged. It's a very, very sad and traumatic history in the United States. But going to the present drone pilots, I had the pleasure to interview one of the drone pilots in Geneva. So the drone pilots actually suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder, so PSTD, in a more acute way than ground soldiers. And this was normally a soldier is able to fight for 20 days in a row in combat until he starts showing signs of stress and so on and so on. And the drone pilots, after 10 days, the drone pilots need to be sent away. And this raised, of course, the highbrows of the psychologists in the military. So what did we discover, or what did they discover? So they discovered that the drone pilot is normally ordered to research a person, to surveil a person for weeks. So, and I think there is a very interesting film. I think it's available now on Netflix. Actually, I was invited by the British Forces to review the film, which is Eye in the Sky. And the Eye in the Sky shows all the British technology that they use at the moment. So, and what happens? The drone pilot is, surveil Afonso to see what he's doing. For some reason, an algorithm raised a flag regarding my life. What happens is that the drone pilot develops what he shouldn't develop, which is empathy for the enemy. He sees, the guy that is a terrorist and buy weapons and kills, etc. But then he sees also that terrorist being a good father, a good member of the community, and he develops empathy. So the problem is that when the drone pilot that doesn't know anything about the chain of command receives the order, target Afonso, he is completely divided. And the film shows precisely this when the girl is involved in the attack. And so the girl is going to be killed. And so the drone pilot is completely... So that is true. However, and we know by the studies that the soldiers, in order of between 80 to 85%, they miss their shots. So that is why, except the snipers, you don't see a soldier attacking alone. So they always attack in battalions and divisions, because except the snipers, the soldier is not able to hit the target easily, because the handshakes, the emotions get into play. And that is one of the strongest arguments of the armed forces for these systems, is that we do not want emotions on the battlefield. These machines are relentless. They work 24/7. They don't miss targets, and they are less expensive than human soldiers on the battlefield, because to sustain a human soldier on the battlefield is much more expensive than to have these machines. I totally agree with your reasoning. I think, for instance, one of the things that I criticize, well, from more ethical point of view, for instance, the drones have created a physical invulnerability for soldiers, but have not created a psychological invulnerability, because they see what is going on. With autonomous weapon systems, we create both. We create a total dissociation of risk. So the person is the robot is, he doesn't know what is pain. He doesn't know what it means to kill. He doesn't know what it means to kill, for example. And also a dissociation of communication. And here is where my problem with this conference is about, is that with AI, communication is disappearing to give place to systems that, now using technical language, they think by themselves, they have more data, they have more information than we do, and they probably are more efficient. Now, the big question is, do we want more efficiency or more humanity? And I completely understand and imagine, being a priest, that we want more humanity. Now, but I'm going to tell you, I gave a conference in Católica 4 years ago, if the memory doesn't fail me, with Professor Pedro Lima from Técnico in Lisbon. And so before the debate, Professor Pedro Lima told me, oh, I was looking at this. I'm completely against autonomous weapon systems. And I said, well, if this is a debate, I will give the arguments in favor. So people were shocked because they didn't understand the strategy. Now the priest wants to kill everybody. But at a certain point, a professor from Técnico that was attending the conference told me this. This system should be banned or prohibited based on the principle of humanity by a question of principle. And I asked her, so imagine that the Portuguese police or army has one of these devices and they know that there is a suicide vector in one of the platforms of the tube in Lisbon. Would you deploy one of these systems to attack the terrorist and not creating chaos or any other victim? And she said, no, it's a question of principle. And I said, so you accept the result that hundreds of people will die because we do not, by a question of principle. And she said, it's a question of principle, which is absolutely fine. And I agree. Now, by mistake, it just came out of my mouth. I said, and if your daughter was in the platform? And she said, well, if you put things on those terms, no, I said, no. If we have a principle, applies to everybody, because the people on the platform are daughters and sons and fathers of someone else. So it needs to apply to your daughter as well. And your daughter needs to be killed as well. So this is, I think, what I struggle, and please don't take me wrong, because I suffer a lot with these things. That is the reason I decided to study. Because when I look to the reality that, for instance, London was in red alert for many, many years. When I was working for the MI5 and MI6, a big attack, so a red attack, we classify in terms of colors, would be dismantled once a month. So there was actually imminent and serious danger of millions of people being killed in train stations, in tube stations, and so on. And then we look. You see, it's a drama, and that is the reason I think that it's fine to protect the principle of humanity. I'm the first one to say that. But at what risk? What balance do we need to find? Or actually, can we go just for a question of principle and, because terrorists, for instance, by definition, don't have the principle of humanity. They attack strictly civilians and innocent people. So
I lived in Israel for 1 year, so I'm very much used to that kind of
yes, I imagine
feeling. So I'm very, very much used to it. Still, I just think that we need somehow to put in the equation the human values.
Yes, no, I agree totally. What my problem is, how do we find and what value will they have? You see what I mean? In practical terms, then. That is my drama.
It's a challenge.
Yes, indeed. I think we have another question from Arif, if I'm not mistaken. Maybe I'm pronouncing incorrectly, but.
Yes, thank you very much. It was a very thought-provoking discussion and questions. Before asking my questions, I would like to say hello to Professor Christina, whom I am seeing for after a very long time. Hello, Professor. Sorry you cannot see me. Okay, so before taking further time, I'll ask my question. Are there any laws of the United Nations or any other worldwide agency which control selling AI-enabled weapons to other countries? I am speaking from Pakistan. So right now, in the past 24 hours, at least 29 drones, Israeli-made drones, were shot down by the Pakistani Air Force, which were actually sent by India. So then I quick question. It is multiple countries, as you mentioned, and in particular working with multiple state agents. what do you think? Do they consider these things? I mean, like the decency of a normal society, or in a normal society that we have. Do they consider these things, like the other people are human, sons and daughters of some people and their families and so on? Do they think about these? Or no, they just develop these war machines, killing machines of just crushing their other opponents?
So thank you very much for your question. Very provocative one. I will try to answer. And so I will have to be very discreet in the way I answer, because as you are well aware, the current administration of this country checks everything that academics say in matters of warfare, and I'm not the first one to receive a letter saying that we are under surveillance because we made some kind of statement that goes against the US foreign policy. So I will talk based on my humanity regarding these matters. I think one of the problems that we are, the problem regarding Kashmir, Pakistan, India, Israel, and so on. So it's not a new problem, but you raise a very important question. There is actually a treaty, so the Weapon Trade Treaty, that forbids any state to sell weapons to countries that are engaged in violations of human rights. And so that would put already lots of obstacles to the Israeli drones. However, I think we are watching probably we know the passion of Christ, and probably we are watching to the passion of international law. So, and why do I say this? And it's a very depressing moment for anyone who teaches laws of war and teaches international law. Because the way that the current administration is dealing with the conflict in Israel, and especially with the conflict in Ukraine, I think in my entire life, I never seen a head of a state being humiliated as President Zelensky was humiliated at the White House, is taking international law as a bunch of rules that the high countries in the world, the most strong or the most powerful states in the world, can do whatever they want. So, and the fact that states are not going punished or held accountable for the violations of IHL, which in the past, if we look to the creation of the International Criminal Court, if we look to the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia, the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda, during the 90s was actually a movement of the states to hold states and individuals accountable for the horrors of war. At the example of the tribunals of Nuremberg, for example, after the Second World War. What we are watching here, especially since the 9/11, but with this current administration, which is not new, we had this administration before, is that international, the neighbor interests if it serves my purposes. If it doesn't, someone is an enemy. And so that is creating a discredit for international law, and states are able to do things and go unpunished and uncontrolled and unchecked, because when you see the Russian Federation invading Ukraine, which is, according to the circumstances, the most grave violation of international law, and then these kind of negotiations that are on the table, and when you see the way the Israeli armed forces are fighting Hamas against and the way they attack also Palestinians, and it's depressing. The law is there. There is law. The problem is there is no willingness to comply with the law, and I think the work that is currently being done by this administration is actually putting very much the future of international law at stake.
May I say something?
Of course.
Well, when you talk of efficiency, reduction of costs, less risk, it comes to my mind that risk, human suffering, costs are major things that make wars to come to an end. Without it, the strongest will simply go ahead until it annihilates the weakest. I think it should be taken away from warfare.
I think it's yeah, I understand your point of view, but the problem is that when we deal with the seriousness of threats, I think states cannot be naive. That is one of the moral responsibilities of a state, is to protect their own nationals. And nowadays it's impossible to protect a state without the use of autonomous systems. I'm taking the word weapon aside. But if a state detects that an attack is imminent, should the state not use these systems? I'm asking the question because, for me, it's also a moral dilemma. Imagine, I understand the position of the Holy See, Austria, and most of the Latin American countries when they ask for a preventive ban of autonomous weapon systems. So this kind of AI cannot be associated with weapon systems. But at the same time, I just think, imagine that Portugal was being attacked by the Spanish. And then, and then there is an important element also to weapons, and we have that very, very present in the nuclear weapons system, is that these systems sometimes work as deterrents for war. Do not mess with me because I have this type of technology. Look to the level of threats that President Putin always puts on nuclear weapons. He doesn't activate a nuclear weapon because he knows from the moment that he activates a nuclear weapon, he will have other nuclear states targeting Russia, and Russia will disappear from the map. So these weapons also work as a mechanism of deterrence for states that want to go into war. So that there is also that psychological element in this technology. So actually, we had a big conference here 2 weeks ago with military lawyers and legal advisor of the Pentagon and academics and Israelis and Palestinians sitting at the same table about the problems of war. And, at the end of the day, we ask, so what should be done? It's so for instance, I remember in an operation that I was slightly involved while I was in the UK. So after the 7th of July, so when the bomb explodes in the bus in the center of London, then we discovered that it was a cell of Al-Qaeda that disintegrated, and the attack should be on the 11th, but because of internal problems. And so London was in a very tense moment, and lots of surveillance operations were put into action because actually the government didn't know. So one of the things of Al-Qaeda is that these people would be normal civilians with a normal life, living normally for years and years. So the 11th of March in Madrid show us that, because those 3 guys were living in that apartment for years with good neighbors, good people. They would go to their job for years. So how could the neighbors ever detected that they would be possible terrorists? So this of course, create lots of anxiety on states. And the UK approved lots of surveillance operations. And there were a group of families that we could not be certain if they were actually involved in terrorist attacks. So we use bugs and crush crows, so baratas, so that we dissect the animals, and then we introduce audio and recording systems, and we would send through the pipes to the houses in question to record. Is this a violation of private data, private life? Is the value of national security superior to this? But one of the families, we couldn't actually record anything. And so, the system got to the point that an operation was created that they won a car at a supermarket. So, these things that you leave after you do your shopping, you leave these coupon in a big thing, and then the award is a car. So that was the way that was created, that family would receive a car, that all the car was weaponized. It had mechanisms to destroy the car, it had recording systems, camera systems. Now, is this legitimate? And if actually that family was an imminent danger for national security of Britain. So here it's, I think, studying philosophy, law, theology, I learned the value of principles. Then when I start reading about this, actually, it was a professor during my master's, you should take the PhD. And I was crazy enough, and my superiors are the guilty ones. They said, you should do this, because it's living in the drama of seeing the victims of these attacks, and also seeing the power of technology and the power and the value of principles. How we coordinate these is something very important. And so that is why I'm very grateful for this invitation, because I think that AI has this wonderful thing that is putting experts of different areas together to think about problems. Normally lawyers know about law, engineers know about technicians, and AI is forcing people from different spectrums with different knowledges from different backgrounds to put us together and ask the questions, and because the AI that we use in war is completely different from the AI that is used, for instance, in healthcare. So even the AI changes according to the field in which is applied, and I think that is what attracts me to this horror film of war and AI, because we can think about this together. We can we can create opposition to states. You can use these under certain regulations, but that it cannot be only lawyers thinking about this, because lawyers don't know anything about AI. I was in a conference back in Portugal, and then I asked a lawyer that was talking about AI. And I asked the person, so how do you deal with the problem of black box? And the person said, oh, black box is only relevant for planes, as you know. So, there's a level of technical knowledge that also lawyers need to have. And this is very difficult for lawyers to have the knowledge of AI. And so we need actually the people together. So that is why I was very excited to accept this invitation, and others where people from different backgrounds and knowledges come together to ask questions. Will we find the solution? I don't know, but at least we talked about it.
Afonso, I don't know if there are still anyone that wants to raise a question or something, but if not, it was an incredibly... There is?
Oh, is Arif wants to ask another question? Is it?
It is just a quick comment, if I might to.
Sure. I don't know if it is my internet, but I hear you
I
with.
will just quickly one comment. There is yes, there is one extension to the use of AI. Let's say there is a war in a country is developing weapons, AI-enabled weapons for the states become deep states, and they start using those AI-enabled technologies and weapons against surveilling its own citizen perspective, a little different from the way that you are telling us about, but this is also a very important aspect of these
Arif,
technologies, because
I'm
once
sorry.
a date or the does not care.
Arif, it's the problem that I'm hearing you with lots of cuts and I'm not able to answer. It's not just me, is it? So
Yeah.
if you could write it down quickly, because it's the quality of the sound is not very good, so I can't hear you very well.
I believe he left.
Oh, if I may, Pedro, I'd just like to thank Afonso. It's always nice to hear you, Afonso. It's
Oh, I didn't know you were there.
yeah, so it's always nice, and your comments are and as technology evolves, things get more and more tricky. So it's always nice to hear from someone who has thought so long and so thoughtfully about this. Thank you for coming.
No, my pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
Is Arif writing or?
I don't know. I believe not.
No.
If not, Afonso, thank you so much. It
Oh,
was
it
No,
is.
my
It
pleasure.
is.
Oh,
Sorry.
deep states use AI-enabled technologies for collecting data regarding its own citizens and trying to topple government. Yes. Yeah, so I presume that I know where the question is going. So when states use surveillance systems in order to control their own population, there's, well, half of the CCTV cameras and surveillance systems are in China. I think China is the best example of a state that use these kind of systems. It's not the only one. But that is, I'm not discouraging the importance of these questions, but these are questions of human rights and not questions of a war. So, and in terms of international law, what a state does in its own territory falls within the category of state sovereignty and is much more difficult to intervene in that level. So that would raise other questions that are not so much related with the technologies of warfare, but with the internal sovereignty of a state and obligations towards human rights of its own population. Very good. I think you probably are exhausted of this.
No. But still we have to come to an end sometime.
Yes.
It was an excellent session. I'm sure that everyone appreciated it. I'm sure that everyone will go home puzzled with lots of things, but that's very good. And that's Afonso, again, thank you so much. It was a real pleasure to listen to you and to hear you. So thank you. I hope we'll meet again.
Yes, please.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. And let's chat soon then. Thank you so much. Have a nice day. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye now.